Welcome to Broken Heartbeat. Today's story is about a millionaire took his housekeeper to a business dinner, and what she did shocked everyone. A divorced businessman took his housekeeper to a business dinner, but what she did when she got there left everyone shocked. Evelyn had been working at Richard Blake's mansion for nearly 3 years. She was dedicated to her job, but she never imagined he would call her in for such a strange and unexpected conversation. Richard, a famous and cold businessman, was going through a crisis in his company and needed to impress powerful investors at a business dinner that night. Without time or patience to find a suitable companion, he looked at Evelyn, who was polishing the shelves in his office, and said arrogantly, "I need you to accompany me to an important dinner tonight. This is not an invitation, it's an instruction. Go and behave. I need someone discreet and without an opinion of their own." Evelyn was surprised, but didn't show it. The request felt more like an order. However, she knew this was her chance to prove something more. As she accepted, she already felt the growing tension and the opportunity awaiting her. This would not be an ordinary night. Evelyn arrived at the restaurant on time, wearing a beautiful, elegant dress. Richard was waiting at the entrance, visibly impatient. He barely looked at her, just muttering a curt, "Let's go," as if you were taking an unnecessary accessory rather than a person. Entering the sophisticated restaurant, Evelyn felt all eyes turn towards them. The group of investors was waiting at a table in the center of the room. Richard introduced Evelyn vaguely and disinterestedly, without even mentioning her last name. "This is Evelyn. She's accompanying me tonight," he said quickly, looking away. The investors, men in suits with evaluating gazes, responded with polite smiles, although some exchanged looks of bewilderment to them. Evelyn did not seem to belong there, and it was evident in their silent looks of judgment. Evelyn noticed every detail but maintained her composure. During the dinner, Richard and the investors discussed numbers, profits, and expansion plans. Evelyn remained silent, attentively observing, and in a way, absorbing every detail. At one point, one of the investors, Mr. Lewis, a tall man with an imposing posture, turned to her with a condescending smile. "So, Evelyn, how do you feel about attending a business dinner like this?" he asked in a tone that clearly expected a timid response. Evelyn felt the tension around the table. She could simply smile and respond with something insignificant, but instead she decided to assert herself. "Actually, it's fascinating to see how everything works up close," she said calmly. "Seeing the concern with financial details and projections is interesting, but I believe understanding the people behind the numbers is also essential." The looks around the table froze. Evelyn maintained her serene demeanor while Richard watched her with a mix of surprise and irritation. She had just shown she had a voice of her own, something he had ordered her to avoid. Mr. Lewis, surprised by her response, let out a short laugh but seemed intrigued. "An interesting perspective," he replied, while the other investors looked at her with newfound curiosity. Richard's expression hardened, visibly uncomfortable with the attention Evelyn was starting to attract. The night was becoming anything but discreet, exactly the opposite of what he had planned. However, Evelyn seemed to be finally finding her own voice in an environment that, until then, didn't seem to belong to her. As the dinner continued, Evelyn remained firm, even sensing Richard's discomfort. He avoided any eye contact with her, clearly annoyed by her attitude at the dinner. Mr. Lewis, however, seemed increasingly interested in involving Evelyn in the conversation. Perhaps because she was the only one there defying the stereotype he expected at a business dinner. When the topic shifted to social responsibility, something that seemed to distance Richard even further from the investors' interests, Evelyn seized the opportunity to contribute. "Does Mr. Blake already consider social projects in his company?" Mr. Lewis asked, casting a provocative look at Richard. Richard hesitated, visibly uncomfortable, before he could give a vague response. Evelyn, without losing her composure, responded directly. "I believe social initiatives are a way to give back to the community for the success the company has achieved. After all, companies exist for more than just profit. It would be an important step." Silence fell over the table, and Evelyn felt every eye on her. But instead of retreating, she maintained a serene expression. For her, this was a matter of integrity. Mr. Lewis, visibly impressed, smiled. "Exactly what I think, Evelyn. It's rare to hear that around here," he said, clearly provoking Richard. Richard's expression turned rigid. He had brought Evelyn to the dinner to be invisible, and now she was attracting unwanted attention. Annoyed, he decided to do something that would change the course of the evening. "Well, it's easy to talk when you don't know the weight of leadership decisions, Evelyn," he said with a slight smirk. "Don't you think you're speaking about something you don't understand?" Evelyn's eyes met Richard's, and she sensed the challenge in his words. But instead of shrinking back, she responded firmly. "Maybe I don't know the weight of leadership decisions, but I understand their impact. And sometimes those further from power see things that those at the top can't." Her response was direct and unexpected. Mr. Lewis, surprised, let out a laugh, clearly impressed with Evelyn's courage. The other investors exchanged approving looks. Evelyn's demeanor impressed everyone, and in just a few minutes, she had changed the dynamics of the dinner. Richard fell silent, feeling he had lost control of the situation. He tried to mask his discomfort, but the damage was already done. To him, this was an unforgivable affront. When the dinner finally ended, he didn't wait for Evelyn to leave by his side. Instead, he went ahead, leaving her behind. Evelyn, however, didn't need his company. She knew she had stood her ground, that her voice had been heard, and that was what mattered most to her. But little did she know, Richard wouldn't let that night go unaddressed. Back at the mansion, Richard couldn't contain his irritation. As soon as Evelyn walked through the door, he called her into his office, dispensing with any formality. His eyes were full of frustration and disdain. "What were you thinking, Evelyn?" He fired at her, barely waiting for her to sit down. "I asked you to accompany me to be discreet, not to become the center of attention." Evelyn, still calm after the intense night, maintained her composure. She knew this conversation wouldn't end well, but she didn't regret her actions. "I just answered a question, Mr. Richard. I did nothing but express my opinion," she said in a controlled tone. "Opinion?" He looked at her with disdain. "You're a housekeeper, Evelyn. You're not paid to have an opinion at a business dinner. You went too far, overstepped every boundary." She held her breath, feeling the injustice of his words. Richard didn't understand her motivation, her desire to show she could go beyond the work she did. To him, she could never be more than the housekeeper. "If my presence was so bothersome, why did you take me there?" Evelyn asked, her voice calm but firm. "Don't give me that." "You were doing your job and getting paid, including to stay silent," Richard responded, his voice cold and calculated. "Consider this your last day here. You're fired." The declaration fell like a final sentence, but Evelyn, determined, didn't let the impact show. She just nodded, maintaining her dignity. She stood up and, with one last look at Richard, turned her back. She left the mansion knowing she would never have to endure Richard's disdain again. That night had given her a clear vision of who she was and what she could do. Evelyn knew that this firing, although harsh, was just the beginning of a new chapter. The next day, as she was packing her last things, she received an unexpected call. It was Mr. Lewis, the investor who had been impressed with her stance at the dinner. He wanted her on his team, a position she had never imagined being offered to her. With a mix of surprise and determination, Evelyn accepted the offer. The humiliation of Richard's firing quickly transformed into the opportunity of a lifetime. In the months that followed, Evelyn shone in her new position. Under Mr. Lewis's guidance, she discovered talents and abilities she had never had the chance to explore while working for Richard. Her determination and leadership skills quickly caught the attention of her colleagues, and she became a respected figure within the company. Finally, Evelyn was in an environment where her voice was heard and valued. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type pizza in the comments. Only those who read this far will get it. Now, let's continue with the story. Meanwhile, Richard's situation couldn't have been worse. The crisis in his company was worsening. Impulsive decisions focused solely on immediate profit were taking their toll, and due to his arrogance, Richard had lost important contracts and driven away valuable business partners. The tide turned completely when the company, where Evelyn now worked, acquired a significant portion of Richard's company's shares, putting Evelyn in a leadership position directly linked to his business. The reunion happened at a major leaders' meeting. When Richard entered the room and saw Evelyn sitting at the conference table, his face paled. He hesitated, his gaze fixed on her, as if trying to understand how his former housekeeper could be there among the leaders. Evelyn met his gaze, relentless but serene, without any apparent trace of resentment. For her, what mattered was her new position and the opportunity to make a difference. The tension was just beginning. After the meeting, Richard approached her, his expression rigid, filled with a mix of disbelief and frustration. "Evelyn," he muttered, trying to keep control. "So now you're here with them." Evelyn stood firm, not letting his surprise affect her demeanor. "Yes, I am. And, as you can see, our company acquired a significant stake in yours." Richard scoffed, masking his insecurity. "This is ridiculous. Do you think that just because you have a position here, you understand what real leadership is?" Evelyn remained calm. "Richard, while I worked for you, I learned exactly what not to do to lead a team and how to ignore the arrogance that blinds people. It was quite a lesson." He stepped closer, his face inches from hers, but she didn't back down. "Don't think this changes anything between us. You are still a lucky housekeeper," he hissed. Evelyn crossed her arms and stared back, her voice firm. "That's the difference between us, Richard. I don't need you to respect me. I earned my place, and it wasn't luck. You, on the other hand, are sinking because you never valued anything besides yourself." Richard fell silent without a ready response. The confrontation exposed the flaws he had spent his life trying to ignore. For the first time, he felt a real doubt, and it came from someone he had considered insignificant. "I'll prove to you that I don't need anyone," he said, trying to keep his composure. "The company you're trying to take over is mine." "Then prove it," Evelyn said, her voice serene but her gaze challenging. "Show that you are still capable of leading and saving your own empire, but remember, the fall of those who think they know everything is usually faster." She left him there in silence, absorbing every word like a bitter truth. Richard felt isolated and humiliated, but that conversation made him see for the first time that he was on a path that would only lead to more ruin. Evelyn was now more than an opponent. She was the mirror he feared most, showing his flaws without any mercy. Evelyn's words echoed in Richard's mind, like a truth he wished he had never heard. After the confrontation, it became harder to ignore the mistakes that brought him to the brink of bankruptcy. For the first time, Richard felt the weight of his pride, the same arrogance that had driven away good employees, partners, and even his own family. That night, instead of burying himself in strategies to try to save what was left, he reflected on every rash decision he had made. Days later, Richard and Evelyn were called to an important meeting with the investors. The atmosphere was tense, and the future of his company seemed to depend on that meeting. Richard, nervous and worn out, entered the room with a stiff posture, trying to show confidence. Evelyn was already there, calm, reviewing some documents. As soon as they sat down, the leader of the investors spoke frankly. "The current situation of your company is alarming, Richard. We need a drastic change, and quickly. To be clear, this is your last chance to convince the board that you are capable of leading and reversing this situation." Richard felt a knot in his throat but struggled to maintain his posture. He began to talk about new plans and strategies, trying to regain control. However, it was evident that his vision was still superficial and focused only on immediate profits. The investors exchanged skeptical looks, realizing that Richard was repeating the same mistakes. Then Evelyn spoke up, surprising everyone with her approach. "The focus of this company needs to change. It's no longer enough to just aim for profit. We need to reconnect the brand with the people, and that means a serious commitment to social responsibility and our employees." The investors exchanged glances, visibly interested, and the group leader signaled for Evelyn to continue. She spoke confidently about the benefits of integrating social projects and humanizing the company. creating a positive impact and ensuring a sustainable future. Next to her, Richard felt powerless. He not only noticed Evelyn's confidence in every word, but also saw the admiration the investors had for her. The truth was clear. He was losing control of everything, and she was saving his company. When the meeting ended, the investors seemed more confident with the plans Evelyn presented. As they left the room, Richard stopped in the hallway. And Evelyn, noticing him, turned around. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Why would you help me save this company?" Evelyn took a deep breath and replied without hesitation. "Because, unlike you, I believe in the value of people, Richard. And more than that, I believe in a better future for this company, with or without you." Those words hit him hard, and he stood in silence, absorbing their meaning. For the first time, Richard felt something beyond pride and self-sufficiency. He felt a genuine desire to change, to be a better person. Evelyn watched him for a moment, then turned and walked away. Richard realized that this woman, once invisible to him, was now his most important example. Richard couldn't get Evelyn's words out of his head. He understood he had made many mistakes, but he felt Evelyn judged him at every step, although he wanted to redeem himself. Richard felt Evelyn had become the symbol of everything he had failed to be. The desire to change was there, but so was the desire to prove he still had something to offer. The tension between them became unbearable. Evelyn, with her impeccable demeanor and sharp words, seemed to see through all his intentions before he even spoke. This irritated him deeply. That week, a crucial meeting was scheduled with the board of investors. The financial situation was still fragile, and Richard knew that any wrong decision could ruin everything. He was determined to demonstrate his leadership and perhaps prove to Evelyn that he could still be trusted. On the day of the meeting, Evelyn arrived early and prepared the entire presentation. Richard, on the other hand, had prepared a parallel speech, something he planned to introduce during the meeting to add a bold touch to the plans. He believed this move would be enough to impress the board and show his commitment. However, when the meeting started and Evelyn presented her plan to stabilize growth without compromising resources, Richard realized the board members were inclined to support her. Even so, he remained steadfast in his purpose. "I understand Evelyn's plan," Richard said, interrupting her at a crucial point in the presentation. "But I believe expansion needs to be done more boldly. We need to show the market that we are in a new phase." Evelyn looked at him with a mix of disbelief and disapproval. She knew Richard was trying to prove something, but this was not the time for ego demonstrations. Controlling her tone, she responded, "Richard, you are aware that this type of approach has already brought us serious problems before. We are focused on restructuring the company and now prioritizing our mission over rapid growth." The board was attentive to the exchange between them, clearly divided, but Richard unable to back down. Continued, "Evelyn, I understand your concern, but if we don't take risks, we are doomed to a mediocrity that will slowly sink us. The company needs visibility. It needs to show results." Evelyn shook her head, remaining calm. "The company needs consistency. Richard, the people we are helping need a sustainable project. We've moved past the point of acting like a company driven by the ego of its leaders." The tension in the room was palpable. Some board members looked at Evelyn with approval, while others seemed willing to hear Richard's side. However, the board president, Mr. Haynes, intervened, asking both to present a joint proposal at the next meeting. Evelyn nodded, maintaining her controlled expression, but Richard felt he had lost the battle. At that moment, he realized he was no longer in control of the company he had built, and the feeling of helplessness grew that night. Richard stayed in the office reviewing financial reports, trying to find a way to make his proposal more appealing. His mind was full of ideas, but none seemed truly viable without compromising the project's stability. It was then that a message from an old contact appeared on his phone. It was a businessman willing to invest a significant amount in the company in exchange for a small say in the decisions of the social projects. For Richard, this seemed like a convenient solution. He would get the investment he desperately needed and at the same time show Evelyn that he was also capable of acting for the good of the company. Without consulting Evelyn or the board, He scheduled a meeting with the investor. The next day, he presented his vision of rapid growth and within hours signed an initial contract. Richard felt triumphant. He finally had something concrete to demonstrate his leadership abilities. She was furious, and he knew he wouldn't escape unscathed. When the call ended, Evelyn crossed her arms, looking at him with an intensity that made him shiver. "You made a deal without the board's approval. How could you do that?" Richard took a deep breath, preparing for the argument he knew was coming. "Evelyn, it was an opportunity. We need this money to expand. I'm trying to save the company just like you." She shook her head in disbelief. "Save the company? Richard, don't you realize how risky this is? This investor now has a say in our social project decisions. What happens when he starts wanting to shape everything to his own interests?" Richard tried to maintain control. "Evelyn, it's a calculated risk. He doesn't have control. He just wants a small share, nothing more." She narrowed her eyes. "And what happened to the commitment to value people, to act with transparency? This isn't the type of leadership we promised to build." Those words hit him like a punch in the gut. He felt exposed, vulnerable, but also resented Evelyn's constant judgment. "Why are you always expecting me to fail?" "I'm trying, Evelyn. I want to do what's right." Let's play a prank on those who only read the comments. Type chocolate in the comments. Only those who get this far will understand. Now, let's continue with the story. Evelyn took a deep breath, her gaze softening slightly, but her tone remained firm. "It's not about wanting you to fail, Richard. It's about you understanding the impact of your actions. Leadership isn't just about making grand decisions, it's about responsibility. And acting in secret only confirms that you still don't get that." Richard looked away, feeling the weight of her words. Maybe I'll never understand it the way you want, Evelyn." She nodded, as if expecting that response. "Maybe. But until you do, you'll just keep breaking the same promises you made. And believe me, that's a responsibility that can become too heavy to bear." 2 weeks later, the board met again to discuss the deal Richard had made without approval. The members were concerned about the contract's implications, and the tension in the room was evident. When the meeting started, Evelyn was the first to express her concern. "This contract represents a shift in the principles we established. Now we have an external investor interfering with our social projects. I believe everyone here understands the risks this represents." Mr. Haynes, after hearing Evelyn's objections, asked Richard to explain his decision. Richard swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. "I believe the investment will give us the financial strength needed to expand and make the project sustainable in the long term." The board president interrupted him, his gaze stern. "Richard, this isn't just about finances. We're dealing with a social purpose that cannot be compromised, and you acted impulsively." Richard felt the pressure mounting. He looked at Evelyn, and her expression was one of pure disapproval. He knew he had lost more than the board's trust. He had lost the last chance to show his ability to change. At the end of the meeting, the board decided to reassess Richard's position, considering reducing his authority over future decisions. Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what rating would you give this story? If you enjoyed it, subscribe to our channel and see you in the next video.